We'll study the blood vessels of the human body. Alright, so what are basically blood vessels? The blood vessels are hollow tubes that carry blood from the heart or towards the heart. And there are three types of blood vessels: the arteries and the veins and the capillaries. Now let us try to understand these three in certain greater details. Now what I have here is the human circulatory system, and I would like you to please look at it carefully. Now, this is the human circulatory system. I needed to magnify it, so I'll have to move the diagram around. Now you don't have to learn the names of any of these arteries or veins, but what you need to do is appreciate that there is this central organ called the heart right here, right? And this is the pumping organ present in the human body. So this is the human heart. And from the human heart, what you can see is there are emanating different kinds of blood vessels. So there are these blood vessels that are marked in red and the ones in blue. So this one here, this one right here, but inside the circle, this curved blood vessel is really thick, really large, and this is called the aorta. Right, now if you look at the aorta, if I remove this aorta from here, if I remove the marker around the aorta from here, what you can see very clearly is that there are these the aorta divides into smaller arteries, and if we follow any one of these smaller, thinner arteries, you'll find that this artery divides into even thinner arteries, right? And at certain places you can see that the arteries further divide and they become thinner and thinner. Now the case is the same with the veins. If you look at the veins far away in the body, they are like really thin. If you look at the feet somewhere here, the veins are really thin, and then as the veins move towards the heart, the size of the veins start becoming bigger and bigger. Their lumen, which is the internal diameter, it increases, and as the veins come close by, you see the diameter of the veins here is larger, and these veins merge together and the lumen becomes even larger. And out here, the vena cavas, this is the vena cava and this is the vena cava here. The vena cava has the largest diameter among the veins. Right, so in today's session we will study what is the difference between an artery, a vein, and yes, another kind of a blood vessel which is called the capillary. Right, so let's get working with that, having seen the circulatory system. Now here what we have is a consolidated diagram of the artery, the vein, and the capillaries. Let us highlight them. So we have an artery here, we have a vein here, and what we have here are capillaries. This is a bundle of capillaries, of a kind of blood vessels. Right. Now what we intend to do at the moment is let us try to compare the different features. How do they differ from each other? There are certain aspects in which they differ from each other. Now the first thing is, let us compare the diameter, the internal diameter of these blood vessels. Let's have a look at the internal diameter. We are going to ignore capillaries for the timing. Let me just type down capillaries here so that we know what we are studying here. So this is the diagram of a capillary, this one here, and certainly this is not a comparative size. We cannot use the size out here to compare it with the size of the arteries and the veins. Anyways, proceeding further, let us compare the lumen. The word lumen, let me just write it down. Lumen. The word lumen means internal diameter. So let us have a look at this. Is the internal diameter. You see here, this is the internal diameter, and out here this is the internal diameter, right? And if you look at the capillaries, I mean, there is no cross section of the capillary here. This is a magnified section of the capillary, but if you look at the capillary here, the diameter is even lesser. But let us compare the diameter. Now veins have a very large diameter, or the greatest diameter among the three kinds of blood vessels. Among arteries, veins, and capillaries, the internal diameter, the space on the inside of the blood vessel of the vein, is the greatest. followed by the diameter or the lumen of the artery. And the capillaries have the smallest or the least lumen size among the three types of blood vessels. Let us look at another feature, comparative feature of the three types of blood vessels. How do they differ from each other? Now let us also have a look at the thickness of the wall. If you look at the artery, look at how thick the walls of the arteries is. You have one of this outermost layer, a kind of a connective tissue, and then you have a layer of muscles here, smooth muscles here, and then you have got the epithelial tissue on the innermost part of the artery. If you look at the vein, you certainly have a connective tissue, and there are fewer of these smooth muscles, and then you again have an epithelium. But if you look at a capillary, if you look at the section of a capillary, let us look at it here. The lumen is really thin, really small, which we studied in our previous as our previous point. But if you look at the wall thickness of the capillary, it is extremely thin. Just see, it is just made up of a single layer of cells. So 1 and 2 cells are connected to each other to make this tube. And so this particular capillary, it may be pretty long, but a capillary is extremely thin with a very little lumen, very small diameter, and the wall is extremely thin. Why is it so? We'll look at it in some time. Now let us look at another feature. Now the artery and the vein and the capillaries also differ from each other with respect to the amount of muscles present in them. Now arteries have smooth muscles, a lot of smooth muscles inside, and even the veins have smooth muscles in the wall, but the amount of smooth muscles present in the vein is very less compared to the smooth muscles in the artery. But why are these smooth muscles present out there? And what are smooth muscles? I hope in your previous classes you've studied about this, but let me just talk about muscles here, very briefly about muscles. Now there are two different types of muscles. Rather three types of muscles. We've got the cardiac muscles, which are just limited to the heart, and then we've got the smooth muscles, which are also called involuntary muscles, and then we've got the striated muscles or the voluntary muscles. Now the smooth muscles are involuntary, which means they are not under our conscious control. So they are under the control of the nervous system, right? And the function of the muscles in an artery is to maintain the blood pressure. Now remember that the blood starts its journey from the heart to different parts, and the journey is really long and tedious, and a lot of pressure is required for the blood to move across. Now there is one very important point that you must always bear in mind, is that whenever blood enters capillaries, this particular network here, anytime the blood enters the capillary, so certainly blood, where does it enter from? It enters from the artery into the capillaries, and out here exchange of material takes place, which we will study soon, and then the blood that is deficient in nutrients and gases, oxygen specifically, moves into the veins, right? The primary point that I would like to make is, when the blood moves across the artery through the capillaries, the pressure reduces drastically. So here the pressure is high. Inside the artery the pressure is high. You know why? Because the heart has pumped it with great force through the ventricles. And through the ventricles, when the blood moves into the arteries, the aorta and the smaller arteries, as we saw in our previous slide, let's go back to the previous slide. So here the blood pressure is really high in the heart, right? And as the blood, let us track this aorta. As the blood is moving in one of the arteries out here, or let us look at the inferior artery. You see this? This is the artery supplying to the lower extremities of the body. As the lumen of the arteries become lower and lower, the pressure is increasing. And when the blood reaches the capillaries, the pressure becomes extremely high. Now you must be wondering that the capillaries should explode. The capillary walls are really strong. We'll talk about it. And due to this high pressure, gases and other dissolved molecules move out of the capillaries and into the capillaries. But the red blood cells and some amount of fluid also moves out, which is called the plasma or the lymph. Some kind of white blood cells called macrophages can also move out of the capillaries. So the cells and gases and nutrients move out of the capillaries, whereas the waste material gets into the capillaries, and the the end product of metabolism, carbon dioxide, also gets into the capillaries out here in this particular region. But there is this down point of this activity. Even though the system has achieved the objective of exchange of material in the capillaries, there is only one downside, which is that the extremely high blood pressure drops down drastically, and the blood pressure becomes extremely low when the blood exits the capillaries, right? So talking about the muscles, let's come back to the muscles. The arteries have muscles in order to maintain the high blood pressure that was generated in the heart. And now there is a drop in the pressure of the blood across the capillaries, and when the deoxygenated blood, when the nutrient deficient blood again gets back into the veins, the pressure is low. In order to compensate for that low pressure, the veins have some smooth muscles that are beyond our control, which are under the control of the nervous system, and the blood is pumped back to the heart. Anyways, let's go to the next difference. So far what we've done, we've compared the lumen, and we've compared the wall thickness. Let me just write the short form so that I can save some time. And we've compared the thickness of the walls, and we have compared the presence of the smooth muscles. Now, and what did we conclude? That the arteries have a lot of smooth muscles, the veins have few smooth muscles, and capillaries have no muscles at all. They don't require it because the blood pressure is way too high anyways out there. The next point of comparison between the three types of blood vessels is the presence of valves. Now, if you remember the human heart, a valve is a gate whose function is to prevent the backflow of the blood. Now, in an artery, there are no valves present. There is basically no need, because the blood is under such high pressure that it keeps on moving in a single direction. Here, the direction of the blood has been shown. It does not require any valve. There is never a backflow of blood in most of the arteries. Why do I say so? Is we'll discuss about this in some time. Now, there is no backflow of the blood in the artery. There is no backflow of the blood in the in the capillaries. But when the low pressure blood enters the veins, the pressure is extremely low. Now, certainly, the drop in pressure is compensated by the presence of smooth muscles, but still, because let us look at the system once again. Now, let us have a look at this. Now, when the blood is traveling back in the veins against gravity, it has to move up through such a massive distance. And the second thing is the size of the veins are now increasing. The lumen is increasing. So, the blood has to travel back, and it becomes more difficult. There is gravity that is stopping it. There is drop in the pressure because of the increasing lumen of the veins, and the blood has to travel back. Now, in order to counter this problem, there are these flap-like structures. You see, there are these valves, and let me use this. There are these valves present in the veins, and let us mark these valves. I hope you can see these two structures out here, this. So we have valves here. You see this and this. So these are the valves. Now what happens as the blood is moving in the upward direction? You see the blood is moving up here in this particular direction. When the heart beats, when it pumps, there is a pulsating movement of the blood. So the blood moves up. But now the heart has relaxed, the blood can flow back. As it tries to flow back, these flaps, they fall upon themselves and close a gate. They act like a gate. So the blood cannot fall back. Now, when the heart contracts again, there is a generation of little bit of pressure, because of which more heart push the flap in the forward direction and gets upward. And so valves here in the veins will prevent the backflow, of the blood into the veins. And so slowly but steadily the blood keeps on moving towards the human heart. Out here in the capillaries, there are no valves. So the next difference that we just studied is the presence or absence of valves. So arteries have no valves, capillaries, they don't require a valve, very high pressure, arteries very high pressure, but veins have a low pressure, and that's why they have valves. Now let us look at the next difference, comparative characteristic, the direction of flow of blood, and this is extremely important. Let me just wipe the board a little so that I can make a little more place for the content around. Now the next point is the direction of movement of blood. The direction of movement of blood. Now in arteries, the blood vessels that carry the blood away from the heart. Let's look into the circulatory system once again. Let me just rub this off. Now arteries here in the human circulatory system are shown in red and the veins are shown in blue. Now we'll talk about this distinction of red and blue in some time, and we will unveil the very popular misconception about the color of the blood in some time. But for the timing, let us just have a look at the arteries and the vein. Here in this diagram, arteries are shown in red and the veins are shown in blue. Now, alright, give me a moment, please. So, yeah. So, the direction of the flow of blood. Now, look at the human heart here. Now, when the heart pumps the blood moves away from the heart. So, in the arteries, the blood is moving away from the heart. You see, this is the direction of movement of blood in the aorta, away from the heart. And arteries will carry the blood away from the heart to the different parts. You see, down here in this, we have the blood moving away from the heart. So arteries carry the blood away from the heart, whereas the veins, their objective, their task, their job is to bring the blood towards the heart, because the veins, they carry the blood towards the heart. You see, the vena cava is to bring the blood into the heart, the superior and the inferior, and there are all the other veins that are bringing blood towards the heart. So what is an artery? And this is the primary definition for an artery. An artery is any blood vessel which carries the blood towards the heart. So artery towards the heart. An artery is any blood vessel which carries the blood away from the heart. This is the primary definition, and you must always bear this in mind. An artery carries the blood away from the heart. And the second important characteristic is that most of the arteries carry oxygen-rich blood or oxygenated blood. This is the definition for an artery. However, not all the arteries carry oxygen-rich blood. There is only one artery in the body, which is called the pulmonary artery, which carries deoxygenated blood away, deoxygenated blood towards the towards the lungs for oxygenation. That is the only artery that carries the deoxygenated blood. Otherwise, what is the definition of an artery? Any blood vessel that carries blood away from the heart and contains oxygen-rich blood. Now, similarly, the opposite of this is a vein. A vein is any blood vessel, and let's use the mustard yellow here. A vein is any blood vessel that carries blood towards the heart. Towards. And veins, most of the veins, they carry oxygen deficient blood, which means they carry the blood that is deoxygenated, that has very little dissolved oxygen in it, right? So that's called a vein. This is what the technical definition of an artery is. This is what the technical definition of a vein is. There is just one vein which carries oxygenated blood, which is the pulmonary vein. There are four of them, two coming from the left lungs, two coming from the right lungs, right? And what about the capillaries? What are capillaries? So capillaries, well, capillaries have the property of both an artery and a vein, which means, yes, they bring blood from the heart and they carry blood towards the heart, right? Have a look at this, right? So an artery can carry oxygenated blood. If you look at this particular diagram here, what we are getting in is oxygenated blood. So capillaries have oxygenated blood. And capillaries also, because at this particular point oxygen will diffuse out of the capillaries, oxygen will diffuse out, nutrients will diffuse out. Also at the same particular point, again at the same particular point, carbon dioxide will get in, and waste materials will get into the capillaries exactly at this particular point. So the blood that exits contains deoxygenated blood, and also the blood that is rich in waste material and carbon dioxide. Right. So capillaries have the properties of both arteries and vein with respect to these characteristics. They also carry the blood away from the heart, and they also carry the blood towards the heart. Also they carry oxygen rich blood, also they carry oxygen deficient blood. Right. Anyways, let us look at the next characteristic, which is what kind of the blood is found in arteries and veins. I think we've done this sufficiently. Arteries carry oxygenated blood and veins carry deoxygenated blood mostly. Pulmonary artery is the only artery that carries deoxygenated blood, and pulmonary vein is the only vein which carries oxygenated blood. Talking about capillaries, capillaries may have both kinds of blood. They have oxygenated blood at the beginning, and they have deoxygenated blood at the end. And this happens primarily because of the exchange of contents in the capillary, in the capillary network. Now, the next characteristic that we must study, a comparative feature that we must study, is the location of these blood vessels in the body. Now, arteries are always deep-seated, are mostly deeply seated inside the body. They are not found close to the skin, close to the surface. And the reason is very interesting, which is that if there is an injury in the artery because of extremely high pressure, a person will lose a lot of blood. And so, in order to protect the body, the individual from loss of blood in case of trauma, accident, the arteries are placed deep inside the body. Veins, on the other hand, have very low blood pressure, and they are thus found close to the surface of the skin. Because of this low blood pressure, blood also has its own elements to clot the blood, so the clotting process is much faster compared to the clotting process in the arteries. Right? So arteries are deep-seated in the body, whereas veins are found superficial. Now, what about the position or location of the capillaries in the body? Capillaries are found in all the parts of the body. They are found superficial in the skin, deep in the tissue. They are found inside the organs like the lungs. If you remember the alveoli that we did, they are found inside the kidneys, which you probably will study sometime. There is something called as the Bowman's capsule, where you find a lot of these capillaries. So capillaries are basically found superficially or deep or inside the organs or tissues everywhere, because all the living parts of the tissues, all the living parts of the body, they require oxygen, and they require nutrients, and they require the removal of waste material, etc., etc. Right? Now let us have a look at another comparative feature. And the last one that we must compare here is the pressure of the blood inside these three different types of blood vessels. So arteries have the highest, have a very high, not the highest, they have a very high blood pressure. Capillaries have the highest blood pressure, and veins have very low blood pressure. So arteries have a very, very high blood pressure, but inside the capillaries the blood pressure increases even more. Why? Because of the smaller diameter, internal diameter. And why is this small size important in the capillaries? So that material can through force move out. Right? So I hope you've understood the comparative features of the three types of blood vessels found in the human body: the arteries, veins, and the capillaries. And also a very important point that you must always remember is that there is always a pressure drop across capillaries, a massive drop in blood pressure once the blood passes through the capillaries. Right? Anyways, moving to the next part, let us just once again just revise what we have just studied so far. So there are 8 characteristics, comparative characteristics, that you must know about the arteries, veins, and capillaries. First is the lumen. Arteries have a very narrow lumen, internal diameter is very small. Veins have a very wide diameter, and capillaries have an extremely narrow diameter. They are extremely thin. Right, now let's talk about the wall thickness. Arteries have a very thick wall. Why? Because there is a lot of there is very high blood pressure, because of which the artery walls can be damaged, they can be destroyed, they can be ruptured. Veins have a comparatively thinner wall compared to the arteries, and capillaries have the thinnest of the walls. The wall is just made up of a single layer of cells. Talking about the presence of muscles, smooth muscles in particular, there are a lot of smooth muscles present in the arteries to maintain the blood pressure. Veins have smooth muscles but fewer smooth muscles. And why are they there? So that the blood pressure can be maintained, so that the blood can be pumped back to the heart. And capillaries have no muscles. Talking about valves, arteries have no valves. Veins have valves. Why? To prevent the backflow. This also aids in the movement of the blood to the heart. Right? Capillaries, there are no valves. Direction of flow of blood. Well, arteries, by definition, an artery is any blood vessel that carries blood away from the heart. Veins are any blood vessel that carry blood towards the heart. And capillaries, well, they have the characteristics of both arteries and veins. The incoming capillaries capillaries are pushing the blood away from the heart. The outgoing capillaries are moving the blood towards the heart. Then let us talk about the type of blood. Inside the arteries, we've got oxygenated blood. Inside the veins, we've got deoxygenated blood, and in capillaries we find both the types of blood, oxygenated as well as deoxygenated. Now, location in the body, arteries are deeply seated for protection against injuries and loss of blood during the injuries. Veins are superficial because they can compensate for any injury due to their low pressure. And capillaries is very important. There is an extremely high blood pressure, and their location, they are found basically everywhere inside the body. Talking about blood pressure, arteries have very high blood pressure, veins have very low, and capillaries have the highest of the blood pressure. So these are the 8 characteristics of arteries, veins, and capillaries, and I hope you've understood this. It's a little noisy on the outside and a little distracting, so well, I still hope that the video is pretty smooth. Thank you.